me talk about, and by the way, let me start by saying, I think we had a strong national security interest and stability in the region that would have warranted our involvement in Libya. I wish that we had a president that had made that case to us. He did not. He instead made the case to the United Nations that we should get involved in their civil war. He not once made a single word of statement in why this was in our national interest. Now, as I said, I believe it was, but his job was to tell us why it's in our national interest. His job was to then seek authority from Congress to engage in that conduct, unless it was a legitimate threat to our immediate security, in which, as executive, as commander-in-chief, I believe he has the unilateral authority to weigh in. But remember, the folks that are defending Obama there were the very ones that were claiming that the president has no unilateral authority to take us to war for the last 8 years before that. At least be consistent, folks, on the other side. But I do know this. If he did need authority and did need to make the case, the people he needed to make it to were the American people, not the United Nations. The United Nations can speak all at once. It doesn't change the constitutional authority that we have by virtue of a constitution that we, this people of the United States, enacted. Not, and Libya is part of the UN, not the UN. Right? And so what's at risk here on Obamacare is the domestic disregard of constitutional limits. With Libya, the international disregard of our constitutional limits. And then now let me bring it back to California, because the same thing is going on here in California. I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about this. Because as bad as the stuff on in the nation, California is such a huge component of the nation. And we have driven off a cliff like Thelma and Louise. All right? And what's doing it are the pensions. And I'm going to talk about that. And by the way, I'm going to show some slides that aren't nearly as slick as his are. But the pension thing is bankrupt, has bankrupt. I used to say is bankrupting. It has bankrupted the state of California. Another Stanford study that came out a year and a half ago was a little on the high side, I think, but it said we're $500 billion in unfunded liability on government employee pensions right now. $500 billion. And like there was some assumptions in there on growth rates and whatever that I think you could tweak a little bit. Maybe it's only $400 billion. All right, $400 billion. That's the entire budget of California for 4 years. All right, and it's unfunded, and you know they have no. And how did we get there? Jerry Brown, at his inauguration last January, got up and said the state is facing a fiscal crisis, and he said, I didn't create it, but I'll do what I can to fix it. Wrong, Governor Brown, because you did create it the last time you were in the governor's mansion. There was a bill passed then that gave public employees the ability to collect a bargain. And I'm going to show you some slides of what's happened in the 30 years since that bill was passed. But on the retroactive pensions, let me focus on this first. In 1999, the legislature of the state decided that the most lucrative public employee pension system in the country was not lucrative enough. It started off by saying if you were a public safety officer, you could retire at 55. And then it was lowered to 50. And you could collect 2 times the number of years of salary times your final year's pay, padded however you could put it with overtime and accumulated sick leave and everything else. So you would, if you had 30 years straight out of high school or college and worked 30 years in that job, you could retire 2 times 30 at 60% of your final year's pay and draw that for the rest of your life. Now when we're living till 65 or 70, that wasn't that long. Now that we're living to 90, that tends to be a big chunk, right? Most lucrative pension system in the country. And yet in 1999, as a result of the ability to collect a bargain with people that you've just elected, with the taxpayers that pick up the tab not on that negotiating table, the legislature gave them a 50% increase. It just looked like a minor little change in the statute books. We changed the authority from 2 at 50 to 3 at 50. How bad can that be? Well, But what it means is after 30 years of working for government, instead of 60% of your final year's pay, you got 90% of your final year's pay. And then when you realize it's not a contribution to that system that's based on your current earnings the year you drew them, like it is with the 401ks, but you get the whole delta because all of those years that you were working at lower rate and your salaries are going up, we're picking the highest salary. So you got all that delta built in, and then all your buddies let you do all the overtime that year because that gets added on, so the salary's actually there. And then we had a little deal where we would let you do a buyout on your accumulated sick leave that you hadn't used and your accumulated vacation time. So if you just not take a vacation the last couple of years, that adds another 20 grand to that base pay. And so now all of a sudden your base pay for that final year is about 140% of what it was, and you're going to get 90% of that. So 90 times 140, 127 or whatever percent that is, right? That means you're making more after you retire than you were before you retired under this. I want this deal. Except it's bankrupting my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids. We're already tapping into their money, all right? And that wasn't enough. Because you retire, and you're the expert in the job you were doing, and they got to get somebody, and they hire you back as a consultant. So now you're double dipping. So you get the consultant fee, and you get 130%, and you get lifetime medical benefits. And I'm doing this for 38,000 employees all over the state, or whatever the number is. You can see why the chart that he put up is going crazy. Well, the talk here is about do constitutions matter anymore. Let me look at a couple of provisions of the state constitution. So we have a provision that says when I incur additional debt beyond my revenues, I have to ask the voters for approval. And the legislature, when they passed this retroactive increase, they authorized every local government, city, county, and regional and agency to implement this if they wanted to. Every one of them that voted to adopt this immediately added 50% to their pension liability. That was a huge accumulated debt that was not funded by any existing revenues. It violated a debt provision. There's another provision on our state constitution. It's been there since 1879. The legislature doesn't have any power to make a gift of public funds to any individual, municipal, or other corporation whatsoever. Now, in the 1930s, the court said, well, when you're working for the government, it's not a gift of public funds. And if I change the terms of your compensation, even after you've done the work, since it's tied to the compensation, that's not a gift. And so they largely wrote this clause out. So in 1965, we, the people of this state, said, no. It's a gift of public funds. So we passed this provision. It says the legislature has no power to grant extra compensation or extra allowance to a public officer, public employee, or contractor after service has been rendered, or the contract has been entered into and performed in whole or in part. That means I don't negotiate for $1 million to build the bridge and come back after I'm done and say I want $10 million instead. I don't get to do that, right? And lo and behold, within a couple of years, the court said, well, that just says when the legislature does it. It doesn't say anything about when the cities and counties do it. And so in 1970, we added another section. I think it was titled, "We Really Mean It This Time" initiative. No local government body gets to do this either. Right? So the legislature passes this retroactive change in the pension formula, which means all those years you've worked earning 2% per year now get counted as if they were 3% per year all along. How is that not extra compensation for work you've already done? It is such a clear violation of the state constitution. But Orange County sued itself. The County Board of Supervisors sued to get out of a contract that the prior board had entered into authorizing this retroactive 50% increase in the pensions. The district court, who's also a recipient of these pensions, the district court judge denied the motion. It went up to the Court of Appeals, and a retired judge came out and argued on behalf of the unions and said to them, this will affect your pensions if you rule for them. You know that, don't you? And then she sat down, all right, and so we lost. Now, part of the reason I think we lost is because the county was suing itself, trying to get out of the contract that it had entered into. But I'm here to enlist your support because taxpayers in this state have the ability to bring taxpayer suits against money that is being spent illegally and unconstitutionally. And I would like to see 58 new suits brought in every county of the state. Wherever there was a city or county government or agency or regional government that adopted this retroactive pension thing, you should call me and we will pull a group of taxpayers together to be the plaintiffs and file suit to get this, because the California Supreme Court denied review. It remains an open issue in this state that we can get there to the California Supreme Court and start having this provision of our Constitution enforced. Okay? So do that for me, and we will try, because we're talking about $500 billion. Think about what we can do with filling some potholes and putting more teachers in the classroom and more firefighters actually in the stations if we had that kind of money. And get rid of this bankrupt debt. Now, let me give a couple of other things here. Oops. Oh, these things got out of order. All right, I'll shift gears a little bit. One of the ways we're trying to fix some of these structural problems in the state, and then I'll put another couple of slides on the structural problems, is by an initiative. And by the way, the woman who was here talking about SB 48, you got to support that thing. Not only are they going to put this stuff in the public schools, but it will drive the national textbook market. As the California textbooks go, it's going to be national. And I was talking to some Catholic school administrators, and they don't have enough clout to get their own textbooks, and so it will affect the private school market as well. And more significantly, this will now define public policy for the state, and anybody in their own school, private or homeschool, that tries to not teach this stuff will be going against the public policy of the state. It will be used to shut down home schools. It will be used to discredit or de-accredit, disincredit, whatever, the private schools and what have you. This is a serious thing. And so sign those petitions, circulate them among your friends, and then when it gets on the ballot next June, make sure you get out and vote for it, because this is critical. The next initiative I'm going to talk about is critical in a different way, and it is a structural reform that will make possible a lot of these other reforms that we need to do in this state, and it's to kind of prevent the compelled use of union and even corporate employee dues from being withheld from their paycheck and then being diverted to political campaigns. We estimate that nearly $250 million went into politics last election cycle here in California alone, and 98% of it was going to so-called progressive leaders who favor big government programs over freedom. Right? We have got to put a stop to this. We're passing around a couple of hats. I think a lot of you were asked to sign the petitions last time, but if you want to support this initiative, and you can put things in the buckets, that will be helpful. I'll see that it gets to the committee, and I'll also at the end of the slide put up the name of the website where you can do that. Let me tell you what it does. Here's the problem. We've got structural deficits of $20 billion annually running through 2015. 12% unemployment rate, the second highest in the country, and we all know that's a fraudulent number. It's more like 16 or 17% because they're taking out of the denominator people who have quit working. In some parts of the Central Valley, the number is as high as 25 or 30%. I think 1 out of every 4, or almost 1 out of every 3 people in the Central Valley in some communities are not working, not employed. $500 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. More than half of our California schools are failing on the national metrics. Our infrastructure, our universities are in decline. This is not, when I first learned of California when I was growing up in upstate New York, California was the place where they had a perfect education system. From kindergarten through university. We're a long way from that now. I think we're 49th. Fighting for that last slot with Louisiana, and they don't even speak English in a lot of parts down there. That older, right? Second highest sales tax and the 4th highest income tax in the United States.